I'm just going to do a brief introduction again. My name is Christy Craig, and I am the publisher at Hidden Timber Books. And I'm thrilled to host Ruby McConnell today. This is part of our small press author reading series that I wanted to start doing once the coronavirus kicked in and all of these book events started canceling. I've got this platform and I thought it would be a really fun opportunity to just invite people who have either had books published recently or they're just now coming out, to give them a chance to reach out to readers, since a lot of the in-person events have been canceled. And what I've found is that it's a really wonderful opportunity for authors to get to meet readers from all over, not just from one particular city where they're maybe speaking at a brick and mortar shop. And so it's really been fun. And if if you feel like, again, sharing where you're calling in from, you don't have to be specific. You can say the state or the region. It's just kind of nice to know where you all are. And a few things before we get started. I am going to keep everyone on mute while we do the reading, and that way we won't get any background noise cutting in. But when we do the Q&A in a little while, you can drop your question in the chat box, or you can use the raise your hand option, which is found in the participants window. And as the questions come in, I'll call out your name, and then you can unmute yourself and you can talk directly with Ruby, and we'll try to keep it as in-person like as possible, even though we're virtually meeting together. And I also wanted to share with you that this reading is being recorded, but I promise that your names and your faces won't be included, so you don't have to worry about that. It's just a way to be able to share Ruby's reading with other people if they aren't able to catch us live. So just to do a quick introduction, Ruby McConnell is a writer, a geologist, an environmental advocate. She's written several books, including A Woman's Guide to the Wild, Your Complete Outdoor Handbook, A Girl's Guide to the Wild, and My Nature Journal and Activity Guide. Lots of really cool books that if you look on her website, they look like a lot of fun. So I'm hoping to check one of those out soon. And then today she'll be speaking about her new book, Ground Truth, A Geological Survey of a Life, which is published by Overcup Books. And they're a small press, I believe, out in Oregon. So thank you again, Ruby. She just launched her book on Earth Day, if I remember correctly. And I'm thrilled to have you here today to share a little bit more about your book. And again, if you've got any technical troubles, then you guys can just send me a note on chat, and I'll be monitoring all that kind of in the background while Ruby does her thing. So welcome, Ruby.
Hi. Can everybody hear me? Hands up, thumbs up. Yes, okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Ruby. Thank you for the introduction. I want to thank Christy and Hidden Timber Books in particular, because she's so right that normally when you launch a book, you have this kind of bubble of reach of your own geography and the funds that you have to get to places and to see new audiences. And so what Hidden Timbers and Christy is doing in events like this is expanding that and those degrees of separation between writers and their audiences. And I think it's just so essential and really making a big difference to ground truth in my work. And so I'm just really appreciative. I also want to thank Overcup Books, my publisher. Small presses are brave, particularly when it comes to environmental work and in telling stories that might be otherwise considered difficult, disruptive, or against the system. So that's really essential. So I am geologist, writer, activist, explorer, first generation American. I am a daughter, I am a wife, I am an Oregonian, and this right here, where I stand, is home for me. This is where I call home now. And that's really at the heart of what I want to communicate today about my work. My work, my writing, is post-millennial environmentalism, which I define as personal responsibility that is deeply connected to your relationship to the land, how you found that, and how you reciprocate what you've received. And that's a collective you. So it's about history, it's about observation and experience, it's about education in terms of policy and science literacy and systems science and increasingly civics. And so how I do that is in my writing through story, through questions and investigation and listening and outdoor experiences, led or coached or through artifacts or however I can get those to people. And then with specific and really sort of sustained calls to action. And I think that that's important because we live in a time of necessary action, and the kind of steps that we need to take are drastic enough that we need to really understand our dependency on the natural world in order to assign appropriate value. And I wrote those words knowing that I wanted to say that when I released this book several months ago, before we entered a time where we're so acutely aware of our dependency on the natural world and the changes in it. So I feel like the timing of Ground Truth is just really interesting and potent. And this is a time of potential in terms of positive change. And ultimately, I think that we need to feel something resonate in order to act. And I think that we're reaching a place collectively where we're more willing and able to do that. So community is important in that. And so I want to start by sort of welcoming the broad spectrum. We have people from sunny Tucson, it is 98 degrees in Tucson, and Portland and Wisconsin and Seattle. I don't think it's 98 degrees in Seattle, but it might be nice. I also want to recognize where I write from, which is from a gender binary, from a sort of middle class, white woman perspective, from isolated Oregon, and that there are all kinds of stories that need to be told about the places that I tell stories that I can help illuminate, but can't tell. And so I encourage people to seek out voices that don't look like me, to listen to and to learn from their lived experiences, and to push forward into those kinds of new stories that are underrepresented with radical love and acceptance. And so since we're in that place, and because I'm about to talk about homeland too, I think it's important to acknowledge that while I say this is home for me, this is also where I stand on the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people. And typically in a book event, I would be able to acknowledge that we are all, if we're in the United States and in many other places in the world, sharing the same Indigenous peoples' land space. But because we're in this really interesting time, we aren't sharing that same experience. So instead, I invite you as a first call to action to go to, oh, I have lost, no, I haven't, to native-land.ca, native-land.ca. It's a great website. It's a Canadian website, and you can look up the Indigenous people who, wherever you happen to be in the world at any given time, anywhere you go, all the time. So that's the first call to action. So hi, we have, oh, somebody, Christy, thank you, just put that in the comments. Ground Truth is a collection of environmental essays, and I want to start by sort of talking about what ground truthing is. As a at its most basic is the process of determining something from a distance based on the information that you have, and then going up to that up close in real life on the ground and finding out the truth of your assumptions that you've made and the determination that you've made. And really, that was the process that I used to write this book. I had memories and experiences and education And they were all rooted as a geologist and as a student and as an explorer of the Pacific Northwest in this place. And I went back and through my memories, through my ephemera, and physically back to these places and wrote these essays from a perspective of ground truthing what I thought I knew about them and what I knew about them from the ground and from a different space and time. And the primary analogy in that I used was Mount St. Helens, which I think most people are close enough to the Northwest to maybe have remembered even Mount St. Helens erupting. When it erupted in 1980, it was right around, I was about 2 years old. And so I start this investigation there. And I think I'll let my writing sort of introduce that. So my plan is I'm going to read a couple of small short things. And then I'm going to give people a chance to sort of pick just a couple paragraphs, and I'll give people a chance to pick a theme, and we'll do something that's a little bit longer. Let me read from the introduction, or from the beginning of Ground Truth. Raven-haired, fair-skinned, quick to laughter, and filled with fire, I am my father's true Irish child in America, the youngest of 3 girls in a displaced clan, born of water and earth. As a black Irish lass, my midnight hair casts me as a character of the ocean, a descendant of the Selkies, the seal women sirens known to sing sailors off their ships and out to sea. Legends say that any man who stole a Selkie's skin could keep her as his wife, marrying her for all eternity to the land. Those same ancient Celts believed that humans were formed of clay, shaped out of the very hills and bogs that nurtured and sustained them until life returned them to the ground. And it is true. The woman I am today is the result of processes and forces of this beautiful and beautiful land to which I was born and am forever married to, a land of transformation and continuity, in which I am destined to abide, endure, and ultimately return. To understand me is to understand the land from which I come. The Pacific Northwest that you see today is the result of 40 years of radical changes in the culture and economies of what was once a resource extraction and agricultural driven region. They are changes so fundamental in nature and scope that they effectively erased a region's history of pioneerism and workaday libertarianism. Changes that, for those of us from this place, will always be marked by the cataclysmic eruption of Mount St. Helens on May 18th, 1980. On that day, I was just 2 years old. Everything that I have stood direct witness to since, everything I know about this place happened after we watched the mountain crumble. The Pacific Northwest I was born to was a region digging out. My understanding of that region I was born to is much like my understanding of Mount St. Helens, based on observations and measurements made from a distance. But one thing is clear: the forces and situations that have shaped my life and those of everyone in the region are knitted to the land, to forces both in and out of our control. In the Pacific Northwest, the land is always the thing. No exertion of human will or industry will take away its precedence. The course of the population's lives are inexorably linked to the whims of an untamable land. A dome still simmers in the crater of Mount St. Helens. Trees still fall by the thousands, but now in the slow, noisy progression of industry, doomed by greed and willful lack of insight. What follows are fragments, field notes from those portions of this land that I have attempted to ground truth for myself. So it was from that place that I really entered into like the 10 years that I spent writing these essays, that place of what is this home place? And so my second suggestion of action, if you're feeling inclined while we're having this discussion of the home place, is for you to think about, and maybe as a 1-sentence project, the answer to the question, where is home for you? And actually that was, in my mind, until the very end of the writing of the book, the name of the project, Where is Home for You? And it actually comes from my father, who asks this of people that we meet, people on the street, friends, waiters and waitresses, where is home for you? And I always assumed it was because he was Irish born. And then as I aged, I realized it was because you get a really interesting answer. Instead of saying, where do you live? Instead of asking it some other way, where is home for you? Has more power, and people provide you an answer that has a little bit more thought and a little bit more connection. So that's where I came from in that. And I think that that is why I landed on the power of story. Because when you ask people, where is home for you? And they give you a story. They say, well, I live here now, but I was born in this other place, but we lived in this one place for a few years, and that felt more like home. And you get this long piece of story about where they're from. And I think it illuminates a lot of what was important to their lives and what were the forces that were acting on that. So I'm going to read one more short excerpt that I think illustrates that from the first essay that I wrote for the collection, which is At the Counting Window. And it is, in my mind, well, this is not it. This is another essay, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go up here to the one that's labeled Fish. It's about salmon, and in my mind, writing about the salmon is like writing about geology. So in my mind, this is still a geology topic, because if you've been in salmon country at all, the salmon are so tied to the water, and the water is so tied to the actual shape of the land that you can't separate the two. So just briefly, I am an Oregon native. Like the wild salmon of the Columbia River, the streams of my youth come from a single source, descending first to the Willamette, then the Columbia, then out to the Pacific Ocean. Like all Oregon children, the story of the return of the wild salmon to their native headwaters year after year to spawn and die has been pressed upon me like the grooves of a well-worn album. How they are first shunted out down rapids and into the salty shock of the open ocean where they gorge themselves on bait fish. How they return by scent to the river's mouth and begin the long and arduous climb to their spawning grounds, the grounds of their parents and their parents before them. How there, after spawning, they die and nourish the waters for the next generation. The stories describe the salmon as prodigal sons, overcoming all obstacles, debris, dams, fishing nets, and sea lions. They tell of the salmon as Pacific gold, the lifeblood of the Northwest people and the keepers of traditions. In the best of these stories, the bravest of the warriors are the salmon of the Columbia River Run, my run. These are the salmon that once ran so thick the fishermen could walk across their backs to make the river crossing. These are the salmon forever immortalized in pictures of the native fishermen on wooden platforms, salmon jumping the falls over their head. These are the salmon I now see behind closed eyes. How do they know what to do, I wonder? Why do they fight so hard? And I feel like we are all salmon these days, sitting in our home, swimming upstream, slowly making our way and our progress to our spawning grounds. And I think that there's something to be learned from that in the struggle, and also in their persistence and insistence on success. So I think what I'd like to do is, I had a terrible time choosing things to read to you. And so what I'd like to do is give people some options. So I'm thinking oceans or eclipses. I'd like to read a full piece through, and these two are brief enough that I think I will not lose you. So you can vote. We're going to do it by chat because I can't see everyone. Oceans or eclipses? Some people aren't voting. I can see people not voting. Oh, you don't get to turn off your video when you get caught not voting. Oceans, oceans, oceans. Everybody wants oceans. Okay. Everybody kind of wants to go to the ocean. This is this is happening because y'all feel like you should be at the ocean. All right. So, oh, I just got bigger in my own view. Okay, hey everybody, you're different now on my screen. I don't think I'm going to introduce this essay at all. I'm just going to let this one wallop you over the head with the coastal marker to begin with, and then we can talk about it. But like everything in this book, true story. What the ocean takes. The ocean is a treacherous wonder. On February 5th, 2011, Jack Harnsenkram and Connor Osland, two strong young men from Eugene, Oregon, drowned when a nearly waist-high sneaker wave swept them off a rock bridge into the narrow chasm 100 meters north of here. The force of the freezing, churning water and the shape of the rocks made it impossible for Jack and Connor to climb to safety, and equally impossible for their four friends to save them without losing their own lives. Jack and Connor died within 3 minutes. Coastal safety marker, Yachats, Oregon. Yachats has been occupied by people for at least 1,000 years, though little of its history remains. For centuries before the arrival of Lewis and Clark, Native American tribes lived in the coastal forest as hunter-gatherers, migrating to the ocean from the inland valleys seasonally, marrying their lives to the rhythms of the natural world. They called the area Yahakt, dark water at the foot of the mountain, and lived there in concert with the sea in low pit houses built directly into the rocks at the water's edge. When the first white settlers arrived to the Willamette Valley, they took the land and its resources by force, marching the peaceful tribes north and west to the ocean near Yachats. Those that didn't die of starvation, exposure, or exhaustion along the way were lost to disease or forced into internment camps. Many tried to escape and were plunged to their deaths in the icy waters, or were beaten and buried alongside hundreds of others in mass graves along what is now Highway 101. Entire tribes were lost this way, along with any proof of their existence. Most historic sites in the area have been destroyed by construction, vandals, and the persistent work of the water on the land. What the ocean hasn't taken, it has buried. The remaining sites have been slowly swallowed by the water's interminable rise. In recent years, Yachats has cast itself as a coastal destination. There are bed and breakfasts and oceanside hotels and restaurants from which you can watch families make their way along the network of public hiking trails that hug the shoreline, beckoning visitors to the water. It is a place of easy leisure as the rocks call to beachgoers with tide pools filled with green-brown anemones, cone-capped limpets, and deep purple starfish, and the ocean offers up spectacular displays of surf and spray. The beauty of the landscape and the constant change in light through the clouds against the water encourage a kind of mindful thoughtlessness, an easy disregard of our immediate surroundings that puts us into needless danger. This ocean, the locals will tell you, takes children like stones. Unlike the disappearance of the Native Americans, which was barely acknowledged by white people for over 100 years, until the 2009 dedication of Amanda's Trail, named for a blind Native American woman who suffered greatly in the marches, the news of Jack and Connor traveled inland fast. I hadn't known the boys, but I did know Jack's mother, Sarah. We took dance together, and for a time, she was a predictable feature in my life. She was an elegant and joyful dancer, and though I never saw her outside the studio, she was a kind of friend. The Monday after the ocean took Jack and Connor, Sarah came back to class to dance with us for a tenuous 2 hours. She seemed glad to be there, following the rise and fall of the drummers across the floor, but after that day, she never came to dance with us again. her absence leaving a great black hole in the space between us. Waves are the ocean's foot soldiers. They form as nearly constant winds sweep across the water, rolling it in great circles. And as the sea shallows towards land, the base of each wave finds purchase on the ocean floor and is slowed by friction. The top of the roll continues unencumbered, outpacing its base and rising and cresting as a wave in a process called standing up. In Oregon, where the water is deep, there are few obstructions to slow incoming water, and as it approaches the particularly steep continental shelf, waves stand up quickly in these waters. After 2 years of dancing without Sarah, I stumbled upon a video about the installation of a coastal safety marker where Jack and Connor had drowned. The video talks about beach safety, telling their story and showing a scene from the dedication of the marker in which Sarah reads while a Native American woman plays the flute. Later, they film her as she stands facing the ocean, her grief like the surf, standing up quickly as she watches the water pass over and under the narrow stone bridge from which the boys were swept. She looks into the ocean, her small, pale hands framing her face as she works to tuck lost strands behind her ears. I grieve too, to look at her. It's painful to see how deeply she has contemplated the scene. She begins to talk about the ocean, the rhythm of the waves, their irregular and syncopated beat, and about the missed warning signs of the water's danger. She points out how the rocks are covered in barnacles, indicating that they spend time submerged beneath the water. How frequently a large wave will wash across the bridge, disappearing it entirely. How they might have known. The video shows a class picture taken an hour before Jack and Connor were swept away. In it, they stand with their classmates, shoulder to shoulder, wide grins across their faces. Of the group, only Jack and Connor have their arms raised, uplifted to the sky, as if they might have known. The scene cuts back to Sarah, who is forgiving the ocean. I still like it here, she says. I come and listen. It's not just the water that needs forgiveness. The rocks are also partly to blame. The very cliffs and crags that make the coastline beautiful have proven treacherous for centuries and taken the lives of those who choose to test the water. But it is the conspiracy of the water with the rocks that is the most dangerous. The more complicated the shape of the rock outcrops, the more unpredictable the surf becomes as water bounces against the rocks. The energy of the incoming waves is reflected and refracted, the troughs of some waves canceling out the crests of others, while still others combine, creating waves of unusual size and force, sneaker waves. Sneaker waves are the thieves and thugs. The force of even a small sneaker wave is enough to lift you from your feet. The backwash from sneaker waves is just as powerful as the swash. Not only do they knock you down, they drag you back out with them. Oregon's Pacific waters are characterized by these waves. Between the years 2000 and 2013, 25 people lost their lives to sneaker waves along the Oregon coast, and at least 26 people were swept into the ocean but managed to survive. It seems it is as easy to be taken as it is to be left behind. I go to Yachats often to sit and watch the people venture out onto the rocks. I listen to the uneven rhythm of the water, think about Jack and Connor, and read the prominent stainless steel and stone safety marker that tells their story and the warning that follows it. There are a few such markers on the Oregon coast, so it is unusual that just 4 years before it was installed, another, quieter marker was dedicated deep in the woods along Amanda's Trail. It was a simple carved stone statue of a Native American woman grown over with moss, meant to remind us of the historical truth of the place and the lives that were lost to coastal forces entirely within our control. The ocean, though, is indifferent and beyond our control. The dark waters of Yachats are especially so. They take houses, lives, lovers, and old couples equally, regardless of heritage or skin color. They have swallowed history, erased cultures, and buried secrets, and continue to do so. On December 8th, 2015, storms washed the bridge to Amanda's Trail and the statue into the sea. Now it's up to us to preserve the buried secrets of our past. From the second half of the coastal safety marker in Yachats, Oregon, respect the immense power of the ocean, know the tide level, face the ocean at all times, enjoy the beauty of the coast safely, speak up to others who may be in danger, and to those taking risks along the shore, listen. And I feel like we could have that safety marker be almost everywhere we go these days, and that it would apply equally. I'd like to mention that I wrote this essay in early January. And so that piece of news that the Amanda's Trail marker had been washed away happened 2 weeks before I wrote the essay, and I had not heard of it at the time that I wrote it. I stumbled across that piece of information as I was finishing the essay. So I feel like there was a real synergy and connection with the process of ground truthing, going back in real time and updating these things, because when I went to return, that marker wasn't there, and I may have managed to write the essay and not know that. So I think it's also a real testament to the power of ground truthing. So that is the large part of what I have to say. When I leave, I'll leave you with another little nugget of reading, but right now I'd like to know if anyone has any comments or questions or answers to where is home for you. You would like to share. I'm especially looking at people like Pat McDonald and Rachel Bell, who are in the house today and who are a part of Overcup Books. They're waving. These are my publishers and my editor. I think it would be a great moment for Pat to have something to say as the editor of the book, since you're lucky that you rarely get the editor of the book in a position where you can spotlight him. So.
Hi, Ruby.
Hi.
Great job. To answer your question about where is home for you, and I love the phrasing of that. It's so much more elegant than where are you from, where do you live, you know, I think much of what I've been thinking about over the last 5 weeks or so is a lot of it is the people that I'm with, and so you know, Rachel and I have been hunkering down here in our home, and it's been you know, we've been doing all these home things, which is great, but I really kind of feel like it wouldn't feel like home if I wasn't with Rachel. So I think it might be people-based. It makes me really appreciate that. And when I think about other places that might be home, I think about my parents and where they live, and I kind of consider that as well. So I think it might be people-based in some ways.
I like that as an answer. Anyone else? I can only see some small portion. Paula has a question. How do we get Paula to be able to ask her question, Christy?
Let me see.
Yeah, I see it there.
Okay.
Oh, hey, we got it. Okay. Hi. Oh, I've lost you again.
Okay, we're fine, right? Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Never mind. Technology is not my friend sometimes. A lot of times I read my book last week and I didn't know how to use my phone which I remembered this week. So nothing's freezing. Yeah, what struck me about, I mean, again, I agree. I like the way you put that as far as where is home for you. I lived in Arlington, Virginia since 1976, but I still find myself sometimes saying, oh, I'm going home, which is where I grew up. And I did my math right here, and I actually lived at home for 22 years. And I'm 1 year away from having lived here twice that long. And I think there's a saying in our little small town in Western Pennsylvania that you can take, in our case, the town is Sharpsville, and you can take the girl out of Sharpsville, but you can't take Sharpsville out of the girl. Yeah. And I really do. A lot of my friends are still there. Family is still there. Facebook group of everybody that graduated together is still there. And that's my home. I love it here. I love my husband. But my values, they all were rooted there. So that's where my home is, at least in my heart.
Yeah, people and values tied to place. Yeah, I love these as answers. And then I see we've got Cascade Mountains of Oregon, Southern Washington. Catherine has specified the western side. Catherine, I am suspecting that that is because of the change in the trees and the change in the rain. I can't see you because I'm in a different thing, but I'm suspicious that that's probably the case, and you probably have a connection to hemlocks and Douglas firs.
Yeah, it's very plant-based. Yeah, the hemlocks, the Douglas firs, the understory, the huckleberry, the chanterelle mushroom, the morel mushroom, the fish. Yeah, I live on the dry side now, but when I cross over the mountain to the valley side, it's like, oh, I remember, it's almost like I absorb moisture.
Yeah. I feel that too. When I lived in Arizona for some time, and I used to just stand and stare at every cloud and sort of and look up at it and be like, why won't you just rain on me? We were in the middle of a drought, and there'd be thunder and lightning. And I was babysitting one day, and finally this kid was like, why do you keep staring at the sky? And I was like, well, isn't it ever going to rain? And she's like, no. I couldn't get over it. Yeah, I totally get that. Click the 9-square icon to the right for gallery view, she says. Ah, okay, better. Excellent.
Okay. Good. I wanted to make sure you could still see everybody. I'm sorry about that it switched to views on you.
Oh, that's okay. So do people have more questions, or shall I read one more little snippet here? I think I'll read. Okay. So, gosh, it's a heck of a time to be an environmental writer. And one of the things, so there's a couple of things happening. We're learning a lot about our environment and our relationship to it, and good and bad. I think we're learning a lot about the ways that it sustains us and the ways that it can be a threat to us. I know that we're seeing a lot of people make connections between systems science like climate change and pandemics and evolution, and how the science is really relatable. And I think that all of that is correct and necessary. But I think first, from an environmental and scientific standpoint, ironically, we need to start with hope. And I don't think that hope and science are separate or even necessarily so. I think that hope and science are often linked to one another. And so in my thinking about being an environmental writer and scientist in this time, I have gone to places of resilience and recovery, and what that might look like, because I think that that is where hope resides. So I wrote a lot about resilience and recovery in ground truth, not knowing that we were going to be in this super interesting time. And then actually in looking through readings, startled myself a couple of times. You know, when you're an environmental writer, you spend a lot of time being, I'm just the crazy woman screaming in the woods while everyone else gets to ignore me and use all their chemicals. And that's fine. You come to accept that role. And then at some point, apparently, things unfold in a way that is similar to what you have been talking about. And it is not satisfying in the way that you think it would be. It is horrifying and disappointing. But I am hopeful that the other piece that I wrote about, the what is to come piece, will play out as much. So I have an essay called Wastelands, where I talk about our propensity as humans to sort of assign zero value or negative value to spaces based on their beauty or what we can procure from that for them, or the conditions being unpleasant or harsh or untenable for, you know, the average person. And I just want to read the very end of this, the last couple of paragraphs, as I challenge that notion of anything being a wasteland. I find myself being concerned that people will look at the landscape of their lives in this moment and decide that they are wastelands because we are undergoing such change. So with regards to deciding whether or not to assign wasteland to the landscape of your life, I say, what if, instead of assigning value to a place based on beauty or even utility, we did so on its ability to endure, its capacity to abide, to exist through time, to wait, stand sentinel, and retain its dignity, to erode and age and crease and be weathered. What places then become our sacred grounds? The dumping grounds whose ponds still support a row of ducklings through the water, the clear cut, the ghost gardens of abandoned cities, the land that holds a skyscraper into the air that remains after it has fallen, the barren rock that is nothing but the promise of soil. One way we measure the value of our own lives is by our ability to endure. We are all striving to abide, to withstand the universe's bombardment without yielding. And that, at the very least, is what our terrestrial landscapes can teach us, for surely the goal is to continue. So let's change the story. Instead of manufacturing a new biosphere in a far distant place, let's look for redemption, regrowth, rebirth, and renewed vitality on our own broken planet, knowing that it will transpire on timescales and due to forces much larger than ourselves. Because if you look closely, you see that craters of the moon and Christmas Valley, they aren't wastelands at all. Neither are they barren or lifeless. They are filled with pockets of nourishing soil, enclaves of coolness and water, and a great diversity of intrepid plants and animals that have adapted slowly over time to these foreboding terrains. And once you see that, you see that in our wastelands is where hope resides. Hope, the stuff of stardust and soil, the promise of life, our own continuity. And I feel like if there is any message that I can give to people right now, knowing what I know about the natural world, it is that we will find a way to adapt and we will continue, and that our strength right now is in abiding, which all of us are doing on a Sunday afternoon together and distant and still in community. And I am so grateful for all of you to have come. I'm really, really appreciative. So I'd like to extend one more piece of gratitude to Christy Craig and Hidden Timber Books. Please look at their work and what they do. To Overcup Books and their books and their other authors and the amazing things that they do. I also have been supported in book sales by Broadway Books in Portland. They stepped up when Powell's Books had to do their shifting, and they've been a wonderful resource for decades in Portland. So broadwaybooks.net, if you want to buy one of my books from them, they would sure appreciate it because they stocked up on that. And unless anybody has any questions, we can all enjoy our Sunday. So I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Ruby. And we do have a couple of minutes, so well, I'll just say a couple of things, but if you still have a question or a comment, you can drop it in the chat box and you'll still have an opportunity to share. But wow, you've given me so much to think about, and I really loved a lot of the things that you said from the very beginning, talking about the underrepresented voices. And so often you do find that in the small presses, which is another reason to, you know, that I'm excited to do this series, just because it's so important to hear those people underrepresented and the stories that we might often miss because they're not in the mainstream. I loved your call to action. I was thinking about that question about home, and you know, what Patrick said about it being people-based. And for me too, it's the way that the landscape imprints on you, because I grew up in Texas, in a small town in Texas, and then I live in Wisconsin, and you know, I haven't lived in Texas forever, it seems, but like Paula, I still call it home. When I'm going home there, I'm going home here. But what's interesting, where I grew up, things have changed quite a bit. It was pastures and things like that, and now that land is all a rolling landscape of homes. And so that doesn't feel like home so much anymore, as if I go further to the southern central part of Texas in the hill country, where it is a lot more pastures and open areas, and that feels like home, and I never grew up there. So there's something about the landscape that just sort of stays with you. And I love thinking about those things, and how a sense of place is built into our lives, but also our stories. And the last thing I want to say, you know, you talk about wastelands and the value in what we call wastelands. And my in-laws have a cabin up north in the UP, and there was an area that was all pine trees that was logged, and it was just like a tree cemetery for so many years. But what was interesting is that all of these raspberry bushes came into bloom, and because they weren't there before, it was sort of overshadowed. And so it's really interesting to think about all that, and to look at the hope that you can find even when you think you're looking at the tree cemetery. There's so much more to be found there. So thank you for that. And I see that Carla has a question. So Carla, I will unmute you, and you can certainly go ahead and ask that.
Wait, I can't hear you. Hold on, I can't hear you. Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for this. Hi, Ruby. Christy, fantastic. Thank you so much for hosting this. I've said that I never would have been able to go to a reading like this. I'm in Wisconsin as well. And so one of the good things that has come out of coronavirus is that now I'm able to go to all of these great virtual presentations and book launches and things like that I never would have been able to go to. So thank you for doing this. My comment, Ruby, is that, I mean, I've said this before on Twitter, the book is one of my favorites of the year so far. And to me, one of the strengths is that you are a scientist taking science and geology and all of these things and giving it this, you even talk about it a little bit, this animism, this life to the oceans and to the rocks and to the land and to the history. And it makes it so vibrant and so interesting that I think no matter, I mean, when I first picked it up, I thought, well, I'm not from the Northwest. I love the Northwest, but I'm not from there. I've never lived there. I thought, I wonder how much this will really speak to me, but it resonated so much. You don't have to be from that area, because the way that you're writing is so vibrant and so applicable. So thank you for that. I think it's a real strength of the book. My question probably won't surprise you, because I think you know a little bit about my background, but in No Men, No Gun, you make it a point to talk about how on this particular trip that you were back in, this particular backpacking trip, there are usually not a lot of women. I think it was in Alaska. So can you speak a little? I was just really interested about how that moment when you came across these 3 women, I think it was, coming at you at the trail, on the trail. If you could speak to gender and how that has influenced not only your writing, but your environmentalism, which I can see, but even your science. I mean, is it something that is intentional? Is it something that really influences your work? If that makes
Absolutely. Yeah, geology is in geologic time in terms of progressing with social justice, and particularly women's issues. We're fossils. And it was apparent immediately in graduate school that, I mean, my thesis advisor from Mount St. Helens she was tenured faculty at Yale. And when she first applied to the University of Oregon, which was not a big deal when she was first applying in the 90s, she got rejected because she was a woman, and it's in the rejection letter. And she applied again because she wanted to work near these volcanoes. And by then, it was a much more prestigious department. And she got in because they had, evolved a little bit, and because she was persistent. But she didn't have like a real warm personality, and didn't really do a lot of things with me outside of handing me rocks and, things like that to do. But she did come in one day and say, Gloria Steinem is speaking at the student union across the street, and you are coming. And she had tickets, and she had come across campus. And she was like, this is important. This is your geology. Like, this is like the most important thing I'm going to teach you. Even though I studied with her for years, she was like, this is the piece that you need to know. And in fact, she was right. In order to be a geologist and be a woman. I mean, I remember I had a woman turn up, a girl in overalls turn up. We were in the middle of nowhere, and I was the geologist, and she was the driller's helper. The driller's helper, which is like the most badass thing you can do in geology. I mean, like, you have to be like a gorilla of a human being. And it was like a girl, and I like ran across the field and hugged her in the most unprofessional manner. And we, like, an hour later, like, the driller's like, shut up, you two. And we're like, no. We were documenting it. We didn't think that had ever happened before. We thought maybe this was the first time that we had been put on, that 2 women were on a crew. And I think that experience, my perception of what we were doing in the natural world, like, none of the tools fit my body. And there was like all of this machismo, like my whole perspective on like just digging a hole was different than the men around me. And I think that it became so divergent that I thought, well, I wrote A Woman's Guide to the Wild predicated on the idea that the female outdoor experience was both unique and valid. And so I stuck to that the female experience is unique and valid in science, in geology, in the world. Everyone's experience is unique and valid. And that if we're coming from that place, then we're being honest and we're being radically acceptive. And that's when you start to get to the good stuff in storytelling, if that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
That's my Gloria Steinem story, and I'm still stoked on that, by the way.
I love it. You could live on that forever.
I totally am still living on that. She was great that night, and it was at the University of Oregon, so it's like hippies, it was great.
Yeah.
So, anybody else? Somebody's got the O. Oh, if only I got, student loan dollars every time I got people to do that in public, then then I would be set. Well, Christy reminded me before I let everyone go that I have one final call to action for the day. And this is for yourselves. Please, for me, before you go to bed tonight, find a way to connect outside. Even if it's through your window, even if it's only for 30 seconds, watch the sky, focus on a leaf fluttering in the breeze, put your face down to a patch of grass and smell it. I don't care what it is, but for all of our well-being and for the well-being of all of the other things for which we are stewarding in the world, please do not forget to connect outside. That's my call to action today. I think it's good for all of us. So go forth into the world. Thank you for coming. I'm so appreciative. Follow me on social media at Ruby Gone Wild, and we can keep talking. So.
Thank you so much, Ruby. And thank you, Overcup Books, for sharing Ruby and her work with us today. Yeah, I thank you everyone for being here on a Sunday afternoon. It's so nice. And I really loved this reading and everything that you shared today, Ruby. Yeah, definitely take a look at Overcup Books. Take a look at Ruby's website and her other books as well. Take a look at hiddentimberbooks.com and see what else is coming up. We've got lots of different authors in the next several weeks, and I'd love to see you all online again. So have a wonderful afternoon. And Ruby, if you want to just hang out for a little bit, we can debrief after everybody hangs up.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Be really well. Stay safe.